Hello everyone from Sportsperson's Ministries. This is Wayne Carpenter with Extreme Bass Tackle, and you're looking at my home water back there, Lake St. Clair, and I understand you guys have a big event coming up. So I thought I'd just offer some pointers for this weekend. I would like to have come and visited you this week, but things didn't work out, so we're going to do this instead. But first, I want to give a big shout out to the Zealand Fishhawks. We were at the Grand Rapids show last year, or this year actually, this last spring, and needed some help badly, and the Fishhawks came through in a big way. Also want to thank Ross and Mark for helping to put all that together. Thanks everybody. Your event's going to be in September, the beginning of September, but we're still talking about a summer bite period, and that's good. In summer bite, things are stable. For the most part, you go to a spot today in practice, catch them, and you can go back tomorrow and catch them too. Sometimes the size will be different though, because the fish move around a lot on Lake St. Clair. But nevertheless, a lot of these spots will hold up. Likewise, with your choice of bait and colors, that's going to hold up too a lot of times. We have just a real super stable weather system right now, but in the summer period too, if you got this stable weather plus a summer period, if they're hitting on one color today, they'll probably be hitting on it tomorrow too. Look for a change in weather to maybe change the color and disposition, but we'll see how that looks during the week, and I know things are going to warm up a little bit. So when we're talking about colors, there's a couple of things that are for sure that after being out here for, I don't know, a couple of decades or so, that you can pretty much depend on. In your plastics that you're using, if you have purple flake in the flake, in the plastic, or you have copper flake in the plastic. Those are the two top flake colors for Lake St. Clair, smallmouth, and almost bass anywhere, really. If you don't have one of those, I'd suggest making sure you bring that along with you for sure, because I know a lot of you are going to be doing some traveling. I've got a couple here that I use. I'm going to show you Canadian Mist, which is my #1 color for all time. It's got your purple, and then St. Clair Crayfish, which has your copper in the back. Now you see a couple of different things with the plastic color too, but I like these two particularly because they're companion baits. If they're not hitting on one, they're hitting on the other. Having said that, I can say recently Sweet Green has been winning some tournaments, and Sweet Green's been a super bait now since 2015, just a super bait, and really been doing a lot of really good work out here on Lake St. Clair. So I know I'm showing you some tube baits right now from my product line, but there's one bait you do not want to leave home without, and that's your confidence bait. Whatever you believe you can catch fish or you've caught fish on in the past, definitely have that in the box. I've seen a lot of people come in from out of state even, top anglers, and they come with their stuff, and they do rather well because they have confidence in it. So that's a good place to start. You don't have to have all of these things, but it's helpful if you don't have something like a purple flake or a copper flake. Those things are really critical to have in your tackle box, for smallmouth on Lake St. Clair. But let's talk a little bit about the baits. Of course, tubes have been working. The drop shot rig is definitely a must. You want to have a drop shot rig available. Sometimes the bass like to feed on the bottom, the big ones, and sometimes they like to feed off the bottom. You don't really know. Each day, if I take out a customer, I will have both going until I find out what's working best. Ned rigs have been really popular. They've done really well, won some tournaments out here, for sure. You also want to make sure you have swim baits. Now, the key thing to me in a swim bait is more that it has a paddle tail. That's probably the most important part. And no matter what color you're using, I like to have a little white on it somewhere. I mean, I use an all-white swim bait most of the time. But if I was to use another type of swim bait, I would want to make sure that there's white in the swim bait somewhere. Now, there's something that worked recently for me when we were kind of in the situation where we weren't getting the fish that we wanted. And I pulled out a spinner bait, which I don't do very often. I usually use a swim bait mostly. But I pulled out a spinner bait. Now, if you go back in history here, 20, 30 years, there's been a progression on what spinner baits seem to work. For whatever reason, and I know this isn't going to make a lot of sense when you see this, but painted blades have been stronger as the waters become clearer. Painted blades worked, 25 years ago or so too. There was a chartreuse and white Nichols is what it was, I think, at the time. And that was just like top dog out here on Lake St. Clair, but then that shifted over to white on white, and these are painted blades. And I can tell you, as the waters become clear, and it doesn't seem to make any sense, but the chartreuse on chartreuse really rocks. And I was able to basically just have my way with the bass that were there. Sadly, they weren't big enough at the time. So I don't throw spinnerbait much, but in certain circumstances, especially if I'm a little bit shallower water, I will throw a spinnerbait. Crankbaits, rattle traps, these sorts of things can be helpful. You can crankbait all day and win a tournament if you're on the deeper water. That's definitely doable. One way to bring up bigger fish, for sure, is to use a jerkbait. So you want to use a jerkbait that runs about halfway down in the water column. If it's like 5 feet, you want it to run 2.5 feet, something like that. And I've got some favorite colors there. Fire Tiger is my favorite, but you don't see a lot of that. Again, confidence is probably more important. I think the main thing is the action. A lot of times the bigger fish will come up on a jerkbait this time of year when maybe they might not be chasing plastics. Of course, time of day has a little bit to do when you use those types of things. Now, you haven't heard me mention topwater. It's not that topwater doesn't work. We used to throw it all the time, but it just doesn't seem to be as effective as it used to be. If you get a chance to practice with it. You may bring up some bigger fish. I think if you use your topwater baits over a piece of cover or structure, you're going to have more success. Like if there's a weed bed, use it around there, a rock pile, something like that, as opposed to using it out in open water. However, open water is kind of good too. And if you're having a really, really bad day, and you see a lonely seagull sitting out there in the middle of nowhere, I'd suggest fishing there. Start there. A good chance that you'll at least pick up one bass. If you see a group of seagulls, even better. There was probably a school of bass feeding on some minnows, and they're still waiting around for the water to get stirred up. So I know that's a desperate move. However, it works. I've used it. It absolutely works. So let's talk a little bit about time of year. It's September when you're going to start fishing here this weekend. And it's not really fall. It's not even close to fall. I know you have a little bit of a cold snap right now as far as the nights go, and that's important, but you've got Lake Huron water feeding this whole system. This is a delta system. So that water doesn't change temperature very quickly. It stays pretty stable for a while yet until things get really, really cold. So right now, we're not really into fall patterns. You might see a little glimpse of that here and there, but we're still into summer pattern fishing. You're looking still for fish that are more or less deeper. We're talking about, 12 to, 20 some feet in that range. And that's where a lot of these bigger fish are sitting, and a lot of people are willing to wait to go through, maybe get 5 bites a day just to get those fish, or video game them. They work good on video game fishing like that too. And that's one approach to take. You might have to be in a situation where you're drifting and you're going through numbers of smaller fish to get your bigger fish. That can work too. But there's a lot of fish out in the deeper water, and in a lot of ways they won't be quite as pressured. However, some of the structure works too. If you're like on a break that's related to the deeper water, I think that can be good, especially first thing in the morning. I got some really good spots I like first thing in the morning that are related to deeper water, and I'll hit those first, and then they'll sort of cool off as the sun comes up. But you don't want to be too close to shore for a good smallmouth. Generally, if you start picking up largemouth on a regular basis and they're all cookie cutters or small to keepers, then you know that you're probably too close to shore and you want to start thinking about heading a little further offshore. Keep in mind, the smallmouth like things that are different. If something is steady and constant, like a steady weed bed for half a mile, quarter mile, something like that, that's not as interesting to them. It's more like a perch, pike type of territory. But if you get wide open water and then you got something sitting there out in the open water that's all by itself, something isolated, smallmouth love that kind of thing, and they love cabbage too. Cabbage is something they like on Lake St. Clair. So when you're looking at some of these edge areas, and I'll call them edge areas that are closer to the deeper water, you're looking for stuff that sticks out, stuff that's related to deeper water that will collect the fish. It might be a point, it might be an area where it turns, an inside turn, outside turn. A lot of stuff we typically look for on inland lakes as well. But you're looking for some subtle differences, and that's where you'll find hopefully a hot spot. if you get a chance to practice, you'll find that and be able to work that, during your tournament. Another thing to consider is current. There's a lot of current in Lake St. Clair. It all comes through the channel system. We've got the North Channel, Middle Channel, South Channel, and of course all the channels that go through the Walpole First Nation territory. But they're all related to the St. Clair River, and they push current through Lake St. Clair. And that water exchanges about once a week. So some of the current will be noticeable. If you're throwing something like a 1/4 ounce, 3/16, sometimes even a 3/8, you'll see your bait move, even out in the lake. So keep in mind that current can have a lot to do with fish location. If you're in an area where you think you're close to fish, kind of look at where the currents are coming in, going around things, and get an idea, get a kind of mental picture of where the currents are going. And there's a good chance that you'll be able to put together some cover or some structure with the current and find your fish. When I'm fishing Lake St. Clair, I like to have a minimum of 6 rods. Why do I do this? Probably for the same reason we all do it, but we want to be efficient when we're out there, especially in tournament conditions. So there's times when we're going to be in shallow water, and if we have to stop and retie, then we're going to miss out on that bite. And I know that the reputation that Lake St. Clair has is that it's all shallow. Okay, well, yeah, shallow is relative, and there's some really good shallow fish up there that you can get. Probably you can get 18 pounds or so just beating the bulrushes and things with spinnerbaits. You can probably do that. We do that from time to time, and it's fun, especially this time of year. It's a good time of year to try to do that. But sometimes it takes a little bit more weight to be competitive, so we're always looking for something in the 20-pound range. So when I'm rigging my rods, I usually go with at least a minimum of 6 rods. My basic lineup for 6 rods will go something like this. I'll have 2 tube rods for sure, and I'll have a different color on each rod. I've been throwing a lot of 5-inch tubes lately, but 4-inch tubes are fine. Just be attentive to which color. Don't throw the same color on both. You want to try some different things right off the bat to try to see what they're interested in biting. Then I'll have a drop shot rod, always. So I'm throwing tubes and I'm throwing drop shots to try to see where the bass are feeding. Then I'll have a swim bait rod. Swim baits are a staple out here anymore, so you really should have a swim bait of some kind on, paddle tail of course. And then after that, I would like to have a jerkbait rod in case I'm in a situation where I think I need to kind of scare up the fish. In other words, they need to be woken up. You run something really hard around a weed bed or an edge or something like this, and sometimes the bigger fish will rise up and they'll grab that jerkbait. And then finally, highly recommend this when the going gets tough, throw a wacky worm. And with the smallmouth, I usually throw 4-inch on spinning tackle. So your wacky worm is kind of like this fallback. They're always going to hit it. You can fish it all day and do great, probably, but it's not always good in windy conditions. Not every situation you're going to be in is going to be good wacky worm type fishing. And if you're working with somebody that's power fishing, then it's going to be really tough to get that wacky worm to give it time to fall. So that's my basic lineup. And of course, I mentioned the color bladed spinner baits. Those are something I have in my back pocket. I've got other sleeper colors that are back there that I know they may not be the most consistent, but when they work, they really, really work. So let's talk about my colors just for a little bit to give you an idea of the spread that I have for Lake St. Clair. We talked about my number 1 color, Canadian Mist. Number 2 color here is Formula G3. And then we talk about St. Clair crayfish. That's got the copper flake. Now sweet green looks a little bit like St. Clair crayfish, but it's definitely a completely different animal. It's a tricolor laminated tube. And then we keep going. We got Great Lakes craw, which is a very strong color. They're either really on this or they're not. And when they're really on, it's streaky and they can be really big. I use that in the drop shot to get big fish, that color right there. And then also we've got Slither here, which is a greenish with gold hologram flake. Now this color is really strong in the spring. It's not something to ignore if you like that kind of color It can be very strong. I don't throw it very much. Another one I don't throw very much is sand craw. Sand craw is a real sleeper bait. I've had somebody just kill me on my own home water with my own bait, sand craw, and I'm throwing everything else in the box. Oh, and I don't want to forget, St. Clair Goby NFT is certainly one of the high producers out here, and I like that really on a drop shot quite a bit. Now, we go a little bit further here, we've got gizzard shad. I like gizzard shad. All these baits were designed for my time out on Lake St. Clair. So you're getting things that either match something on Lake St. Clair, like St. Clair crayfish is real crayfish out of Lake St. Clair. Gizzard shad is based on my design there. St. Clair Goby NFT is based on the gobies out of Lake St. Clair, and they kind of changed color. You also have Muskegon Goby. Now, if you look at Muskegon Goby, it's got copper flake in it. Well, St. Clair Goby has purple flake, so there's your purple-copper combination if you want to work that back and forth. Baits like brown craw haven't been really strong out here, but they can be. I know they're really strong on the west side of the state, where I know a lot of you are coming from. Oh yes, and then we have Great Lakes perch. Now, Great Lakes perch, I don't throw all the time. It's really strong on Lake Erie, and a lot of sales down there will support that. On Lake St. Clair, I don't always throw it. It's not the most consistent, but it's consistent for big fish, so you don't get a lot of small fish on Great Lakes perch. So if I'm in need of a kicker and only a kicker, I've got everything else I need, then I'm throwing probably Great Lakes craw on a drop shot, and then I'm throwing Great Lakes perch in the 4-inch tube or a 5-inch tube, even better. Most important part of this body of water to focus on. Keep in mind it's a delta system. It's not just a lake that has like a static shoreline. This has got a very dynamic environment where things change all the time. Water can flow stronger or faster depending on the wind coming down the river, and that can change the entire lake. You can get storms to muddy up the river, which will muddy up the lake. That changes things. So you get a lot of big variations. So how do you handle those things? Where's the best place to go to fish? It's good to have a north-south, east-west strategy. The reason why I bring this up is because, well, for two reasons. The big water, and this is what it is, Lake St. Clair, you can't see across at points. It's big water, so you get a big blow, then it's going to change things. It's going to change where you can fish. Sometimes you won't be able to reach spots that you really love to get to because you know there's fish there. So yeah, north, south, east, west strategy means you've got places to go no matter which way the wind is blowing. This is really critically important because you don't want to wake up one morning, no matter what the weather report says it's going to be, and then end up in a situation where you can't get to your spot. That's one of the hardest pills to swallow if you've only got one spot. Now, I don't know for sure if you guys are able to go up in the river system or how far, but the channel system's been a little bit better this year. The St. Clair River in general hasn't fished really strong, but the channel system's a little bit better. When I mean channels, is where St. Clair River splits in a north and south channel, then middle channel, and so on and so forth. So that part of the system there has been, at least one tournament was won recently out of the channel system, which hasn't happened a lot over previous years. So that gives you a real option if it's blowing really hard. There are other parts of the lake that have been fishing strong, like a lot of people have been doing well in Anchor Bay, and a lot of people have been doing well, even good on the mile roads, and I'm thinking the Canadian side's probably out, in this case in the Indian Reservation. So those areas may not be open to you. The good news is there's smallmouth everywhere right now. In the summer patterns, they disperse and are pretty much all over the lake. So it shouldn't be too hard to put together that kind of a strategy and have spots ready to go. They might always be your best spots in practice, but keep in mind the fish are always on the move. So if you got a school of small fish today, it could be a school of big fish tomorrow or even later on in the day. Let's talk about spots just for a second. If you have a spot that's really good in the morning and it's rocking and you're getting your fish there, go back to it later in the afternoon. It's something to consider anyway if it's in your, in your path. A lot of times you sort of burn the spot at first because they kind of get wise, you get your fish and everything, and you move on. And especially if nobody else is fishing, but if somebody else's fishes, that's fine. There's schools in and out all the time. But if you're able to come back and hit the same spot that was really good for you in the morning, there's an excellent chance it'll be good for you in the afternoon if it's a spot, like not a whole area, but a spot. Whole areas can change with the sun, but sun penetration and stuff like that. But a spot itself can hold up all day, and that different schools move in on spots throughout the course of the day. So it's a good idea, a good part of the strategy to put it in there to come back and hit a spot, even if it's only for 5 minutes, just to see maybe that spot was hot this morning. There should still be fish there this time of year. One other thing I'd like to add about fishing on the big water, and I'm sure a lot of you have experience with this, but I fished, Lake Erie, Saginaw Bay, big bodies of water, and they're all a lot different than Lake St. Clair. You might think, well, Lake St. Clair's smaller, it's not as bad. I have fished in huge waves in those other bodies of water, and I was able to manage my day fairly well. Yeah, I could see land and not see land, and see land, not see land. I mean, the rollers were big, but they were rollers. On Lake St. Clair, you basically have a chop out there, and the chop is pretty brutal. In other words, you can't really time out how you're running your boat. You can't always make a really good decision while you're running your boat, because some people call them square waves. When you have boat chop out there, the waves are coming from all directions. So somewhere you can get to in 20 minutes in the morning, it can easily take you twice as long or longer to get back in the afternoon. So keep that in mind. You need to get back in the way, and you need to get back there in time. And if you don't allow a little bit extra time there to get back in the afternoon, it can cost you. I see it a lot, and I realize a lot of anglers are going to be more accustomed to largemouth fishing, and that happens even amongst the pros. I've seen it where they're using largemouth patterns out on Lake St. Clair. For the most part, even if they are successful catching a largemouth, the chances of, especially if it's a 2-day tournament, but a 1-day tournament, maybe you can pull out a limit of largemouth that'll be competitive, maybe. I'm not sure that I can. Knowing what I know, I'd have to have access to a lot of water to be able to pull that off, and might be able to pull it off for 1 day. Very difficult to pull off for 2 days in a row. And so if you're looking to compete with largemouth on Lake St. Clair, and the whole place looks like it has fish, it looks amazing. But the growth rates for largemouth aren't that wonderful here. There's a lot of colder water most of the year, so they don't grow as long as they do in some other bodies of water. So you're going to see a lot of 2-pounders. A lot of 2-pounders, 2.5, maybe you can get up to 3s, maybe. To get 5 3-pounders would be, really great. You have to work really hard at that. I've gone and beat the lily pads, I've gone and beat the backwaters, things like this, and again, it's a lot of work. It really is. But pound for pound, the smallmouth are going to win most every weekend, and they do. If you come to the weigh-ins, you'll see that happen. So you'll pick up a big largemouth here and there. I mean, it can be pretty impressive, maybe 2, but to put together 5 could be a daunting task. So I would just caution, it depends what you're trying to do for this tournament. If you're just trying to put in a good showing, catch 5 fish, you can do that with largemouth all day long. If you're trying to win, then it's going to be an uphill battle to do it with largemouth, and you have to have a lot of time on the water and a lot of knowledge to be able to do that. So just keep that in mind. However, having said that, I have a chapter in one of my books, even catching smallmouth with largemouth tactics. So don't despair. A lot of your largemouth tactics can work on Lake St. Clair. We talked about the wacky worm already, and you can even use a 5-inch if you want to, but I recommend 4 on the wacky worm. Your spinner baits, your swim baits, these are things you use for largemouth anyway. So you can use the same tactics. And worst case scenario, pull off from shore a little bit away from the smaller largemouth and get into at least the mid-range smallmouth. If you're in, let's say, 3 to 9 feet of water, in that range, and you've got some weeds nearby, some rocks nearby, good chance you'll have smallmouth nearby, and your largemouth tactics can work. I'm not so sure that some of the more heavy-duty largemouth things like jig and pigs, I've seen them work, but that'd be more of a big fish bait. I don't know that would be an everyday type of thing, but there's a lot of largemouth tactics that will work, so don't despair, but just don't give up on the smallmouth if you're looking to put together a winning sack. Well, thank you for taking a few minutes with me here. I hope that I've been some help. I know that you guys are a tremendous help for me in Grand Rapids, and I appreciate that. I wanted to give back a little bit concerning that for sure. I think you're coming at a very exciting time. The water levels have been dropping, and if you can imagine a lake that's full of bass and all of a sudden there's less water, that means we've got more bass, at least temporarily, and we have less water for them to be in. So it makes them a little bit easier to find than it has been during the high water years. So you guys should be really good fishing visible structure, things that are typical for bass fishing everywhere. So that should be a little bit better this year than it has been in years past. You're coming in a stable period, which is great for the summer pattern. And the biggest thing you'll have to deal with is weekend boat traffic. It gets rocking and rolling out there, so watch your time coming back. Make sure you make an allotment, because the morning's going to be a breeze, and then the boat traffic's going to start, and it's going to change things quite a bit. So kind of allow for that. If you're in the channel system, you definitely have to allow for that. Usually about after 11 o'clock, what we call tuna boats, the big boats, get going, and then it gets really rough in the channels, because not only are we rocking and rolling, but a lot of the shoreline spots or spots that are close to shore get muddied up from the boat wakes and things like that. So it gets a little tough that way. And in Labor Day weekend here, it could be, everybody could be here on Lake St. Clair, or everybody could be up north, and you'll have it to yourself. Hard to say. It kind of goes both ways. Sometimes I've seen it happen both ways. But nevertheless, as far as the fishery goes, you're coming to a world-class fishery with a lot of bass in it. So just, whatever you do, take your time, during your event, while you're fishing and everything, do all the little things, because sometimes it's not always being on the biggest fish. Sometimes is, did I retie after catching 2 or 3 fish? Did I retie that bait so that I don't lose the bait? Sometimes it comes down to netting the fish that's coming to the boat instead of thinking about being on the biggest fish. Sometimes it comes down to culling. There's a lot of little things that can make up a really good day on Lake St. Clair, and it's certainly a tournament day where you're getting your best weight. So you want to be on the biggest fish, easiest fish, net them all, have 20 pounds in a live well by 9 a.m. That'd be beautiful, and it happens. But if it's a long day, don't give up. Sometimes the afternoon bite can be better, and that's proved itself out in some of the early tournaments this year, where the afternoon bite is where a lot of these people got their best fish. So anyway, it's going to be exciting to have everybody here. Congratulations for making it this far, and I hope I get a chance to see you soon.